As project teams grow, the ability to manage communication becomes exponentially complex. A formula can be used to better understand this relationship that calculates the number of lines of communication based on the number of stakeholders that exist. The purpose is to understand the premise that adding 5 people to an already large team is more complex than adding 5 people to a small team. Let's take a look. The formula to calculate the number of lines of communication is n times n minus 1 divided by 2, where n is equal to the number of stakeholders in the project. So if 5 stakeholders exist, we can calculate 5 times 4 divided by 2. Therefore, there are 10 possible lines of communication for 5 project stakeholders. One way to think about this is if you are the 5th stakeholder, there are 4 people left to communicate with. We divide by 2 to remove redundant lines. If I have established a line of communication with you, you don't need to count one with me. Now grab a pencil and some blank paper and try one on your own. You are managing a $5 million project in China. After performing the acquire project team process, you have hired 5 hardware engineers and 4 software developers. How many lines of communication exist? The possible answers are 9, 36, 45, or 72. On the real exam, a calculator will be available in the exam interface. I will give you 30 seconds. Pause the presentation if you need more time. The correct answer is C, 45 lines of communication. The first thing you need to do is figure out how many stakeholders exist. There are 5 engineers, 4 developers, and you, 1 project manager. For those of you that guessed B, you may have forgotten to count yourself, the project manager. Putting 10 into the formula results in 45 total project stakeholders. While the formula is relatively easy, the questions can be tricky. My first tip is to double check and make sure you have found all of the stakeholders in the question. Let's try one more. Project ABC currently has 8 total stakeholders. As the project moves into phase 2, 5 actors will be hired. How many lines of communication will be added with the acquisition? The possible answers are 5, 10, 50, or 78. I will give you 45 seconds. Pause the presentation if you need more time. The correct answer is C. 50 lines of communication will be added. You cannot simply plug the difference through the formula and get the right answer. In this question, there is a before and after scenario, so you will need to figure out how many stakeholders existed before the change, Then figure out how many exist after the change, and then subtract the difference. Before the hire, there were 8 stakeholders, so there were 28 lines of communication. After the hire, there were 13 project stakeholders, which results in 78 lines of communication. When subtracting 28 from 78, we find that 50 lines of communication were added to the project just by adding 5 people. My second tip is to make sure that you go through the formula twice if there is a before and after situation.